It's over 9,000!
Welcome, Super Elite Warriors, to Final Forum, a podcast for the discussion of all things Dragon Ball. I am your host, Jelli, an elite recruiting member of the Frieza Force, on a mission to find the best warriors from across the galaxy to join the greatest army of all time. And I am joined, as always, by my new recruit co-host.
We've been under attack for days now, going back to when this siege first started. Our forces are entirely depleted. It's just the two of us. And we're going to record one of these things now?
We have an obligation to Lord Frieza
that we can't even fulfill because we have no ship, and we're probably going to die.
Bekinney, you forget, within the parameters of our mission, we have submissions as well.
Yeah, to find Earth. Which we also can't do because we have no ship, and we're probably going to die. Or at least, I probably will. Again.
You're forgetting that Lord Frieza also relies on us for reports on the Dragon Ball universe, as it is of special interest to him.
So special that he's willing to let us die in order to hear a little bit more about a few more episodes?
I do not pretend to understand the demands of our Lord. I just enforce them.
Well, what should we do about our current situation? The Carbivores seem mostly dead, just a few stragglers outside the range of our automatic energy beams, but they don't specifically target Frieza Force members, so that's out.
Can you manually override the system?
Well, not the entire system, but I could probably take over an individual gun at a time, maybe?
And pretend you're playing a video game and start firing.
That is horrifying. How can you be so casual about that?
When you've been stranded on the ring world Aurelia with nothing to eat but your reclaimed meats from the wreckage of your ship and a legion of giant sand leeches, and have to watch the light fade out of your recruit's eyes as he dies from the stress, that's just one of 1,000 missions you've been on. You become pretty hardened to blasting away some dots on a screen. You'll get used to it.
Should I?
Blast the dots? Absolutely.
No. Should I get used to that?
It's either that or die.
This job's losing a bit of its luster.
Nonsense. How many people get to play video games for work?
Has everyone ever told you that just because you keep saying things, it doesn't make them true?
Yes. You. Several times. It's becoming tiresome. And so, instead of listening to that, how about we have a little chat? And our topic of discussion today, in case you couldn't have guessed by now, is Dragon Ball video games. And specifically, we're going to be winding the clocks back a while and looking at the first 3 Dragon Ball video games ever created. 2 of them were created for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and 1 for the Super Casette Vision console.
Yeah, so the first ever Dragon Ball console game was developed by Epoch and released in September of 1986 for something called the Super Casette Vision console. So let's step back just a bit and take a peek here. So
Name
Epoch,
of the game?
Yes. Name of the game was Dragon Ball Dragon Daihikyō.
I forget what that means. That's the one I forget.
Believe if I remember the English title, I believe is something like Secret of the Dragon or something like that.
Yeah, it's something. Yeah.
Anyways, so Epoch, the company that developed it, is a toy and computer games company that was founded in 1958. They're best known for their portable game/console called Barcode Battler, which had to do with scanning barcodes on physical cards that were used to build a character. But due to the ubiquity of barcodes in daily life, people were encouraged to experiment with scanning barcodes on like everyday things like cereal boxes or bags of chips or whatever you could find around the house to see what effects it would have on the gameplay itself. The game was first released in 1991, but Dragon Daihikyō predates Barcode Battler, but Barcode Battler did go on to have a lot of tie-ins with major franchises through like Mario and Zelda. But beyond that, Epoch's been an influential video game designer throughout history, as they released Japan's first ever video game console in September of 1975, which was called TV Tennis Electrotennis, and it was a dedicated
rolls right off the
game.
tongue.
Yes, it's it's A+ to the marketing on that one. But it's a dedicated tennis game like Pong, and Epoch's creation of the original Cassette Vision in 1981 was Japan's first ever programmable video game console, which meant it could play multiple video games. Epoch is, or was, it's not super clear, the designer of pretty much all Doraemon games, but it's been almost like 20 years since they last designed and released a video game. These days it seems more like they do tchotchkes, like aqua beads and puzzles, and like make your own bracelets. And they also make baseball trading cards for the Nippon Pro Baseball League.
Yeah, what a weird journey.
It's kind of, I mean, it kind of like weirdly mirrors Nintendo's development, because they started out as a playing card game company and then eventually went into video games, whereas this one seems more like started in video games and now they're doing, other stuff.
They also, from what I remember kind of looking at some stuff, they did like, did you ever have one of those handheld games that was like just that game, and it was like black and white with just the little
LCD screen? Yeah.
And your character could technically jump, but like it just like lit up the LCD above where your character was.
I remember those being like super popular when I was younger, but it was mostly for like sports games like baseball. I had one for bowling that was pretty fun.
Yeah. It seems from what I could tell, they did some of those too.
Oh, that's cool.
Not super easy to find out a lot about these guys. I was on their website doing like Google Translate on their website. We all know how reliable that stuff is. Dragon Ball Dragon Daihikyō was one of 30 games ever released for Super Casette Vision. And the entire console, not the games, the entire console moved about 300,000 units. It never really took off, and it actually is the console that caused Epoch to drop out of the non-handheld console market entirely. So you can imagine the game itself was also probably not wildly popular. The game itself is an overhead shoot-'em-up similar to 1942, just to pick a popular example. You play as Goku, you're riding around in the Nimbus, either flailing your power pole at enemies or blasting Kai Blasts or Ki Blasts, possibly Kamehamehas, at them. You have to survive to the end of a stage where you come across a series of temples, basically, and if you blast the right one with your energy blast, you reveal a Dragon Ball. You collect one of those at the end of each stage, and throughout the stages, then various character avatars pop up, and essentially just passing above them, like passing over them, gives you points. Points do something, I think. And there's
I think it's just bragging rights.
Probably. There's a Master Roshi encounter in, I believe, the second stage, where if you pass over the Roshi character, you can spar against him in a training round that allows you to power up your Kamehameha. You also have to collect food, or your power pole gets shorter as Goku gets hungry and weak. Once you collect all of the Dragon Balls, you get to watch a tiny little animation of panties falling from the sky in front of Shenron, a la The First Wish. That's pretty much everything there is to the development and the kind of gameplay of this game. I played it. I also
played it.
I don't know how long you lasted. I lasted a solid 2.5 minutes, maybe?
I made it, I think, to about 10. That said, all 10 of those were spent trying to get past the first level, which I did not do.
Yes.
So I think I can understand why this game probably wasn't all that popular. That said, the graphical fidelity for a home console that predates the Nintendo, actually pretty good.
There's a bunch of stuff about this that's actually not terrible had I had a Super Casette Vision in 1986 when the game was released.
Yes, just to make it clear to the listeners, we do not have a Super Casette Vision. We did not play the original version. We happened to find a version that was hosted on a website and tried to play it. Apparently, I think they said that the sound effects and music were off, that they weren't correct.
Yeah, if you've ever seen, like, there's YouTube videos you can look up of people playing the actual game, and the soundtrack is just the doot 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 doot, and it's just like that. It's almost might even just be that, just over and over and over.
I'm sure that didn't contribute to its not popularness.
But I mean, it's a lot of those kinds of, Atari level type of things. Just had monotone sound effects and monotone music to them, right? It's weird because there's things about this that I think if I were more intrigued by it and, a little more taken in, or quite frankly had fewer options of like just better things to do with my time.
Yeah, if this was the cutting edge of video games, I'm sure we probably would have played more of it.
The controls themselves don't seem super terrible. It's pretty responsive. You can slide your character around pretty fast. Like, it doesn't seem particularly broken from an aspect of gameplay. The one thing that's super hard, and yeah, like you, I didn't make it past the first stage. And I might have lasted longer than 2.5 minutes. I think I gave it like 3 or 4 attempts. There's these bats that come at you, and they come down to the level however far up vertically on the screen you are. They come down to that level, and then they slide over from the side. And once
there's like no way to attack them.
Yes, once they're on the same level as you, it's impossible to attack them. You have to, in order to fight these bats, as they're coming down, you have to slide over to be in front of them.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to avoid them if you don't destroy them. So it's...
yeah.
From that point of view, anytime one of these bat waves comes down, if you don't kill the bats, you're going to take damage. And you could get hit, is it like 4 times, and then your life is over?
I think it's 4 times, yeah.
My biggest frustration was once, like, you get locked into these situations where once a certain thing happens, if you can't slide over, because there's also other enemies start appearing, and they're shooting stuff at you, and stuff like, it gets to be kind of like 1942, obviously way less graphically interesting, but where there's like stuff flying all over the screen and you're not allowed to touch any of it. If these bats appear at the same time as anything else, you're probably going to take damage. Now, I watched some playthroughs of this, of people who are apparently just better at video games than me. It seems like when you get to the Master Roshi encounter, which does suddenly switch to like a side-scrolling thing, the controls on that looked clunky.
Oh.
That looked like one of those things where you hit the punch button and a half a second later is when he actually punches.
Ooh.
And the punch itself is slow and your movements are like an old school like NES like wrestling thing where just the movement seems all a tick off. Yeah. The person I watched do a playthrough did not defeat Roshi in that encounter.
Well, canonically, that's correct, right?
Sure.
They were just staying true to the story.
was actually, for its time, a pretty decent game. It's just, and I hate to be like it's just so past then, but like, fire up Pong and tell me how long you would play Pong for,
I wouldn't even bother trying to play Pong.
Yeah, it just, there's no point in it anymore. Like,
given it the time frame that it was made in, I thought the graphics were pretty good. Unfortunately, I can't really make an honest assessment of the music, but the sounds and music that I did have weren't terrible. Controls, like you said, for the flying portion were pretty tight. I had the same issues with the bats flying sideways, and eventually I just had to like fly around them as opposed to trying to kill them. I was a little weirded out by the power pole, though. The animation for that is very suggestive.
It's interesting, yeah.
I also wasn't really sure what purpose it served, because I was figuring I wanted to shoot stuff with the Kamehameha at a distance as opposed to letting things get close enough to actually have to hit it with the power pole, but I guess maybe it's like an emergency button. If something gets a little too close, you can tap that and hopefully kill it.
Well, the Kamehameha is like drop down. They don't have that long a range.
Oh, yeah, and they don't quite go the whole height of the screen, if I remember correctly.
I think the game would be a lot better if they did. If you could kind of blast stuff like bullety, it would actually improve things a lot.
Probably.
Because if you could see something coming and go pew pew, and then move over to take care of the next, it would probably help a ton. And yes, when I said flailing your power pole, that's the best description for that animation without, You could also say flopping.
It's a fun little diversion, but I can't see anybody getting more than like maybe 10-15 minutes out of it before it gets really old.
Yeah, I think if you had this console, you might have played this game a bit.
I could see that.
Plus, this console only had 30 total games, so you didn't have a whole lot of other choices.
True.
But so that's the first Dragon Ball game. The second one came out for the NES, and it was the first one published or released by Bandai, and it's called Dragon Ball Shenron no Nazo, or Dragon Ball Shenron's Mystery, or, and we'll talk about this, Dragon Power.
So this was produced and distributed by Bandai, like you said, beginning of their stranglehold over the Dragon Ball universe in terms of marketing. At some point, we'll probably do an episode about Bandai and how they're totally not an evil conglomerate that has a massive monopoly on creating toys and games and more for some of the biggest franchises in anime and tokusatsu, and we definitely probably won't talk about how their increase in power has altered the very course of certain franchises.
No.
But anyway, Shenron no Nazo was developed by Tosei Software. Tosei was founded in 1979 and has developed or co-developed thousands of games since their inception, but it's rarely ever credited. They take pride in being a behind-the-scenes kind of company whose vision is, quote, "Our policy is not to have a vision. Instead, we follow our customers' visions. Most of the time, we refuse to put our name on the games, not even staff names," end quote.
That's a vision.
Really
that's a mission statement for you.
That's quite the mission statement. We have no aspirations of our own. In addition to many Dragon Ball games, they've worked on games such as Bases Loaded, Mappy Land, Toxic Crusaders, Tetris 2, Yoshi's Cookie, Resident Evil Survival, Resident Evil Zero, Scarlet Nexus, entries in the Dragon Quest franchise, some WWE games, and they've worked on the Windows port of Metal Gear Solid, which sold like hotcakes, I'm sure. Seems that they take pre-existing properties and kind of do the next one, or ports of like a handheld version or something like that for the most part.
Yeah. It's an impressively long list of things that they've worked on. And then also the list came with like an asterisk that was like, many of these are like, it said like, with exception of Dragon Ball and I forget what the other franchise was, it was like, many of these are assumed to be ones they've worked on or uncovered over years of discussions with people who have worked for them. It's like it basically was like a cobbled together list of things that are confirmed or semi-confirmed, and not like you can't go to like Tosei's software site and find like a list of the games they've worked on.
It's all part of their marketing strategy.
Which
that word of mouth campaign.
It's a thing, I guess, right? To just be like, and that's where I agree with that assessment that like they do the next one or ports or the handheld version or whatever, because like it seems like basically I don't know, pick a, I don't know who develops games, right? So just
EA.
EA. I think they work on WWE games, right? They've done a whole bunch of them. And now, because like they worked on like Raw versus SmackDown 2008 and 2009, this Tosei. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, EA had a really busy 2008. Let's call up Tosei and just have them like do the same thing that we already did.
Yeah, so it's more like the IP owners, if you will, like subcontract them to do like low budget sequels and things like that.
That's what I feel like. Maybe I'm wrong.
That seems accurate.
We should say that's not a certainty.
That's our assumption.
So, Shenron no Nazo was originally released in November 1986 for the Famicom, which was it's the Japanese version of NES. Here we called it the Nintendo Entertainment System. In Japan, it was the Family Computer. And it was then ported over to the US as Dragon Power. So about this Dragon Power port. Remember, in 1988, nobody in the US knows what Dragon Ball is at all. We're still 7 years away from its US television premiere, which wasn't even successful to begin with. Which I think that got canceled after like 3 years and then was brought back like 2 years later under the Toonami banner. So we're still more than a decade removed from Dragon Ball being a kind of bigger thing in the US that people know about due to Toonami. But when a game moves over 1 million units in Japan, which is frankly not that big of a country and not that big of a market, the publisher takes notice and probably wants a slice of that action internationally in the US, where things, Mario is selling tens of millions of copies, right? But Bandai was pretty aware that nobody in the US knew what a Dragon Ball was, so instead of maybe releasing the game as is and letting this be America's introduction to it, or even just sitting on the game and not releasing something that would have no name cachet here in the US, they instead go through the game and they strip out everything Dragon Ball about it. They alter character sprites, they change names, they change the story, and they release something that's borderline incomprehensible. Not to say that it's super comprehensible in its original form either.
That's fair.
Perhaps they just knew they didn't have a very good game on their hands, and they didn't want to kind of sully their franchise by having this be American audience's introduction to it. But for whatever reason, they renamed the game Dragon Power, and they changed other names as follows. Bulma is now Nora, Yamcha is Lancer, Oolong is Pudgy, Pilaf is King Minos, the Kamehameha is the Wind Wave, Dragon Balls are they are Crystal Balls. Roshi looks like a traditional bearded old man martial arts master, and instead of panties, there's a part in this game where you can pick up some panties and they help you run around really fast. Yeah. Those sprites are now flipped upside down, and they're called sandwiches. And every reference to panties in the story portion is now some kind of reference to sandwiches. Yes, really.
American censorship is flawless. As for the game itself, it's a 2D overhead beat-em-up where you play as Goku and fight your way through enemies with switches to side-scrolling moments for bosses and mini-bosses. You can jump, punch, duck, and that's about it. As you walk around, you can randomly attempt to go into various nooks and crannies in the field of play and hope you stumble across a cave that has power-ups inside, whether they be more energy, which you are going to wish it is, like more often than not. Yeah. The power pole, which extends your punching reach, or a pair of panties or a sandwich that allows you to move faster. And as you move around or punch or get attacked, your energy steadily decreases. When it goes to 0, it's game over. If you've made it to the next stage, you can continue, but you start at the beginning of whatever stage you were on when you died. Like, 0 progress really being saved outside of what level you're on. The story for the first 6 stages is basically the first arc of Dragon Ball. In stage 1, the boss is the bear thief that Goku and Bulma encounter early on. Finish the stage with meeting Master Roshi and having him give you a Dragon Ball after seeing Bulma's panties. I mean, being handed a sandwich. In stage 2, you're saving the village from Oolong, and the boss battle with him is basically just finding where he's hiding in some clay pots. There's not much difference in the Dragon Power version except for Oolong's name. Next up is Yamcha in stage 3, Ox King in stage 4, Monster Carrot or Boss Rabbit, depending on your translation, in stage 5, and Pilaf's Castle in stage 6, where, again, the boss battle is mostly about just getting to Pilaf, since, accurate to the story, he's not really a boss and he doesn't fight you. But in the Dragon Power version of the game, when it comes time for Roshi to put out the fire on Fry Pan Mountain, and he wants the Pafu Pafu from Bulma's boobs, he instead wants her to give him a hamburger. Which is way more suggestive, I guess. Because he wants to put that meat in them buns. Then you get to the wishing portion. You can choose one of 4 wishes. You can move the dragon. You can move the dragon at the title screen, which affects nothing aside from adding an animation to the title screen of the game. You can choose to power up, which allows you to have a higher maximum energy level, which would make additional playthroughs a little easier. And then there's the option of future, which allows you to skip the next few stages. And then the final one is panties, which allows you to rewatch the part where Bulma shows her panties or offers up a sandwich, depending on your version of the game.
Yeah, and then after that, there's still, unmercifully, another 8 stages to this game. And it's at this point that even the Japanese version of the game starts hewing pretty loosely to the story of Dragon Ball. The next 4 stages are a tournament, much like the Tenkaichi Budokai, but instead of, the opponents that Goku actually faced in the tournament, he first fights Krillin, which you're like, oh, okay, right? Because that's when we introduced Krillin.
Yeah.
Then Major Metallatron.
Wait a minute.
Then Yamcha.
Wait a minute.
Then Booyan.
Something's not right here.
Who we'll talk a little bit more about Booyan in our next episode. After that, you head to the moon to battle Monster Carrot / Boss Rabbit again. Then you go to some random island where the boss is a pair of crabs, and you don't even have to fight them. You can just jump on top of one, punch through the floor, go up to the second. There's two levels to the boss stage. You go up to the second level and jump over the other one, and then just walk out of the room. Then you're in a jungle, and you have to fight against a boss named Bimbo, who's a jungle martial arts master and shoots arrows at you while he's kind of going up and down these vines. And it's like a platformer type of level. I thought this guy initially was some kind of riff on Nam or Nam. But
I get it. Vietnam.
But, even the Japanese version calls him Bimbo, so it's not necessarily a riff on Nam.
That's disappointing.
Then finally, you fight your way up a tower, and that's similar to Muscle Tower, but instead of anyone from this Muscle Tower arc that we've been talking about recently, you fight the Ox King again, because I guess, and then a robot that's controlled by Pilaf, and then you get another wish, which your choices are either animate the title screen, replay the game with your higher power level, or rewatch the panties part, or rewatch the Pafu Pafu / hamburger part. What a wild ride.
I didn't play this one for a super long time either, and it's actually not having anything to do with my skill level at the game. It more has to do with the energy mechanic like we were talking about earlier, because it steadily decreases as you move. If you get unlucky with like your caves and stuff and you don't get items that replenish your energy, you can only get so far in the game. It's kind of weird that all progression in this game is almost sort of just based on luck.
Yes. It's insane. There's a whole lot of luck in this game, and I don't like that. And it's crazy because it's not like I'm against games where you have energy that depletes as you kind of walk around. I mean, do you ever play Adventure Island?
That's the Nintendo game, right?
Yeah.
I think I might have played it like once or twice when I was very young.
Okay, that's what that is. You control a character, you have health, and it steadily decreases. I don't know if it can decrease to 0. I think it can. But it, is hard for it to go down to 0. In fact, it's so hard for it to go down to 0, some of the later stages in the game have very, very little health or food that you could power yourself back up with to make that one of the more challenging levels of the game.
Interesting.
In this, it's like this. You start with maybe 100 as your energy, and you'll punch
everything you do consumes energy,
and fast too.
Yeah.
You'll punch your first 2 or 3 guys, and you'll be down to 70. And then you go into a cave, and if that cave doesn't have energy in it for you, you're damn near screwed before you even get to the first mini boss. Wildly broken in that respect, especially because when it comes to the boss fights, your reach is so short. It really is. You better just hope that you have enough energy heading into that boss fight.
I found a pretty good strategy for the mini bosses, but even so, it's still rough. So when you're in those side-scrolling portions, there is a jump kick. If you jump and then hit the punch button, he will do a jump kick. And I found that there's a very small window where you can jump kick over the mini boss's head, still do damage to it, and then land behind him so that he can't hit you with his sword swing. And then you just kind of continually hop over the guy. The issue is that it's really easy to screw this up and end up doing a lot of damage to yourself.
This game's really, the difficulty grade is hard. I did actually make it to the 2nd level.
Really? I'm impressed.
And at that point, my luck ran out. I had a string of luck. Went into a cave and I got energy. I went into another cave and got energy. I mean, I was getting energy from guys as I was defeating them. I had a string of luck. I made it to the 2nd stage and I promptly died pretty quickly.
I think there were multiple times where I would finish a mini boss and have less than 30 energy. And so almost immediately after I did something, after leaving the cave with the mini boss, I would just die.
Yeah, it's a shame too, because it's
actually a fun game.
Yeah, if the energy mechanic were maybe just you lose energy when you get hit, or you could somehow have here's your energy for walking around. You can also get hit 5 times.
I don't know. I mean,
well, maybe not. Maybe
given
not even
the
that,
length
but
of the game. Given the length of the game, I don't know if I'm a fan of consuming any kind of energy to do anything. Because, in my opinion, it's already punishing enough in terms of the amount of damage you can take. Because you can take a lot of damage really fast if you're not down with the timing for your attacks.
And yeah, it's the crazy thing, especially in the first stage. There's no intuitive way to know when and where a cave is going to be. You just have to walk into the walls of the stage and hope that that's a cave.
It's almost like the gameplay loop should be that when you get to a new area, the bulk of your energy should be devoted to figuring out where the caves are so that you know on your next run through the area.
Yeah.
And you don't waste energy looking for them, you just know where they are.
And that's not a fun way to play a game.
Not especially, but I can see why they would want to do it that way, because they're trying to prolong how long people are playing the game, I guess.
Which is fine if your game is like 3 stages.
Yeah.
This game is 14. And like I said, I made it to the second. I not immediately, but I pretty quickly ran out of energy on stage 2. And like that was it. I couldn't take it anymore.
I was actually, after trying this for a while and kind of getting a grip on like what the gameplay loop is supposed to be, I'd be interested in watching speedrunners try to do this game.
To get a feel for what the rest of the story and how things go. I did watch some long play videos. I mean, it really seems to me like a lot of it was getting lucky, like way more lucky than I did with drops. Like,
oh yeah,
I was stunned how often people were getting energy drops. But then the difficulty actually seems to abate a little bit when you get to like stage 3, I think it was. There were there were cave openings and they were very obvious.
I gotcha.
And there were lots of them. And it was like, oh, go into that cave. Oh, that cave looks like it's filled with enemies. Go back out and go into the next one. It's weird that it was so punishingly difficult early because it actually seems like it gets a little bit easier the further you go into it.
Yeah, maybe. It seems like a weird design choice, though.
Yeah, because I couldn't barely beat the first stage. And then, yeah, the animations are on the story portions are bad. I mean, it's the NES, right? So
yeah, we're not expecting anything groundbreaking here. And as far as NES games go, like yeah, the little cutscenes in between, not great. The actual gameplay, like sprites and stuff, it almost kind of reminds me of like a cheap Zelda knockoff.
Yeah,
but without the excellent map design.
Yes, very much like especially the overworld portions, right? Like
yeah,
that's very Zelda-esque. The story portions of this, by the way, in the American version are insane. So you've seen, you Bekinney have seen like the animations of when people are talking. So yeah. When you get to the part where he wants to pafu the boobs, it's those characters standing there, and she's still kind of squeezing her hands against her, like in that motion, that pafu motion.
Yeah.
But she's just like, he'll be like, I forget, it wasn't this exactly. I almost wish I had written it down. But she comes up and she's like, hi. And he says, hi, I don't like you. And she says, I have burgers, as she's doing the pafu motion. And he goes, burgers? Give me one. And then they both go, oh yeah, ooh, while they're making that motion. And
those
then
must be some delicious burgers. And
then the screen flashes red, and like that's it. And you're like, if you were playing this game as Dragon Power and you made it that far, you'd be like, what? You would honestly, you'd be like,
Imagine wasting one of your wishes on rewatching that cutscene.
You'd be like, is burgers code for sex? Like,
I don't know.
And then even with like the panties scene, it's either I want to see your panties or give me a sandwich, and then it just cuts to the Roshi character with panties or sandwiches flying around him in a circle.
That's because somebody hit him over the head, and instead of seeing little Tweety birds, he's seeing sandwiches.
I think in the Japanese version, he does get the nosebleed, though.
I really love how these games are focusing on that one part of the story. Just fantastic. So many other things you could talk about in that show, and they all want to focus on the panties.
The story is super incomprehensible in the American Dragon Power version, though. It's madness.
Good old American censorship.
Like between borderline incomprehensible censorship and then really poor translations. I've heard some interesting stories from people who have worked for Subaraya company about like, these are American people who have worked for Subaraya who they have been in a room or come across something that was like meant to be the ad in English for Ultraman or things like that.
Okay.
And they've been like, I'm the only person in this building who speaks English as my first language. Would you mind if I passed my eyes over this and been like, oh my God, what do you can't say that. Like,
I would pay so much money just to see pictures of these ads.
Like,
and what was so offensive. Not
even offensive, but just like no one will watch your show. You can't say, you know, Ultraman being is the most power of the, you know, like that's.
Oh, so you're talking, it's more sounded like somebody had a stroke as opposed to just being straight up offensive language.
Yeah, and even like, again, this I might be a little bit off base here, but Japanese as a language is structured very differently from English.
Sure.
Like, if I'm pointing across the room and I say, that apple over there, a Japanese speaker would say, there over, that apple is.
Kind of like Yoda a little bit there.
You can structure things that way in Japanese because of how the language is built verbally,
right.
And
yeah.
Right. You cannot say things like that in English.
Oh yeah, no. Absolutely not.
And that's my understanding of like how some of these ads and things were written, of just like, people don't talk like that in English. But so that is very much in a lot of ways how the English version of this is. But also just like at the very beginning, Bulma Nora says, let's go on an adventure. And then Goku's immediate reply is, where to find them?
The hamburgers, clearly.
You know, and then Nora says, like, here, the radar dragon, take to look at. Like,
oof.
And then he says something that's like also a non sequitur. Like, but no, of these games that we're talking about, and we still have one more to go. If I was going to play any of them again, it would be this one.
Yeah, I think I would probably go with option 3, assuming I could find a working version of it.
Okay, let's talk about option 3 then. This is Dragon Ball Daimaō Fukkatsu, or Dragon Ball Great Demon King's Revival, which, if you know who the Demon King is, that lets you know what the game is more or less about.
So Daimaō Fukkatsu was again released by Bandai and developed by Tosei. It was released in August of 1988 for the Famicom. It was never ported over to the US or Europe, and to date, no official release in English exists of it. You play as Goku, shocker, I know, and move around a board trying to reach a destination to get to the next stage. As you move around, you encounter various characters. Some provide you information or story, and some you have to fight. Fight outcomes are determined by randomly generated playing cards, which you can choose to play in any order you prefer against an opponent, and if the number on your chosen card is higher than your opponent's, you attack them. If it's lower, they attack you, and ties result in like a push situation. Nobody attacks anybody. Once you reach the end of an individual stage or board, you walk through an NES approximation of a 3D area to try to level up. But you have to be careful of traps that can hurt you or even outright just straight up end the game. Every time you move on the main field, on the overworld map, you draw a card. If you draw a Piccolo card, you enter a battle. If you draw a Shenlong card, you recover strength with Senzu beans. If you draw a Popo card, nothing happens. And if you draw a Fortune Teller Baba card, you either simply draw another card, have a nervous breakdown, forcing replacement of all the battle cards currently in your hand, or you do some training to level up.
And the story so then takes place during the King Piccolo arc, but with differences from the story as we know it. You know, Krillin gets attacked by Piccolo at Kame House, not at the martial arts tournament, and at one point you fight through a school as a reference to Oolong being in transformation school, and like you have to find the students that are not students anymore, that are Piccolo's minions and have transformed themselves. You also return to Muscle Tower for like a side quest through where you re-encounter the Pilaf crew. You fight through the pirate caves of the General Blue saga as well. And so, although your main adversary is Piccolo, you're fighting your way through a lot of the arcs that had been done from the prior game's release up through this game, right? From the end of Muscle Tower up through this. And even a couple, right? You revisit Muscle Tower. I think when you revisit it in this, it says like the ruins of Muscle Tower. So it is acknowledging that happened. You also visit Fortune Teller Baba as part of the story, and you fight members of the Crane School of Martial Arts, and you even go to Korin Tower. A lot of this stuff we'll be talking through as we hit those episodes in the future, but this is something of a playthrough of just all that stuff, just with the twist of being a battle card game. The only working version of this I could find was in Japanese. The game...
You got a little bit further than I did, because I couldn't even find a working Japanese version.
The game in Japanese... the game as a whole is very text-based.
Yeah.
It's very, you're looking at a room and the text describes the room, and then it brings up a series of options based on what has just been described to you. And the options typically are like move, search. Those are the two, unless your character sees something like, so those are the first two. Like you'll go into a room and it'll say, this is the whatever. And then you could click move, which means you move to like the next room, or you could say search, and it'll like say you found a dresser drawer, and then the options will be like search or move again. And then if you search, it'll say you found a flashlight. If you find a flashlight, then the options become search, which I don't even know what clicking on that does, move, or take. And you have to click on take in order to pick up this flashlight. Just finding it does not mean you take it. And there's all kinds of things like that when you're playing this in Japanese, it's essentially unplayable, quite frankly. Ways to like use items and objects and ways to progress through the game, unless you're fluent in Japanese, it is unplayable in Japanese. To get a feel for how the gameplay kind of really works and everything, we found a video on YouTube of someone playing a translated version. Yeah. This isn't my style of game.
It's very much my style of game. So they change genres here, if you will. They went from like you said, the 1942 style to sort of a top-down, almost like Legend of Zelda style, and this one's got more of a mist. It's kind of got like that thing where you're sort of going to different areas, searching for things and picking them up, like you were saying. But then it's also got this really, for me, it was kind of an interesting battle system. So as you're progressing from point A to point B on your overworld map, there's all these little dots along the way. And what you have to do is you have a hand of 5 cards that have a numerical value of 1 through 7, represented by the Dragon Balls. Then there's, in the Japanese version, it's a kanji, but in the English translated version that we found, it's like a picture of like a fist or a foot or like the power pole or something like that. And I think that denotes like what kind of attack that it is. And then on the bottom is another number value, which is the amount of damage that attack would do if it hits. And then battles are essentially choosing how many cards you want to use. If you can pick between 1, 2, and 3 cards, and the enemy will also pick between 1, 2, and 3 based on what your choice is. And then you get to decide like what cards you're going to play and what order they get played in. And then like as we described earlier, if your card is higher than their card, your attack is successful, you deal damage. If their card's higher, their attack is successful, they deal damage to you. And then ties just is no damage. I thought it was pretty cool. I thought it was an interesting way to do... Because like I'm a huge D&D nerd, so like when I see like random number generation to determine success of attacks, I automatically think of a D20. But the problem is that rolling a die on a video game is not very fun.
Yeah.
So I liked how they got around that idea of determining whether an attack is successful by giving you a stack of cards and letting you choose, and then seeing if you beat the enemy's number. So I thought that was interesting. And then it's got the other regular tropes of like, you defeat somebody, you get XP, you get enough XP, your character levels up. Then increases health, increases your amount of damage you can do, things like that. But yeah, this one appealed more to me than the second one because there's way less luck in determining exactly how far your game's gonna go.
There's still a bit of luck, right?
There is a little bit as far as like the combat mechanic is concerned, sure.
Yeah.
But it is also mitigated by the fact that like you can sort of like load your hand up with strong cards if you happen to get a lot of fortune teller babas as you're progressing across the map. And then obviously as you use them in combat, you draw new cards. So there's also always a chance that you're not going to just draw a bunch of 1s and 2s, but you'll draw 6s and 7s as well. So it does help kind of mitigate the randomness a little bit.
Yeah, I can see how there is a little bit of strategy involved. There's strategy involved in the battles as you have improved later in the game, where let's say you come across a battle later in the game against a weak opponent and you've got a couple of weak cards in your hand. You might choose to play 4 cards and have your first 2 be weak ones. And if you get lucky, sure. If not, at least you get those out of your hands. This enemy doesn't kill you, right? Because he's weak. Mm-hmm. And you maybe get some better cards in your hand, right? That kind of strategy can come into play, but it takes a long time for you to get to that point.
There's also, I forgot to mention, the movement between points of interest with the dots. You move a number of dots dependent on what card you discard from your hand. So like if you discard 3-star ball, Goku will move 3 pips on the map. If you sacrifice a 1-star ball, he'll move 1 pip. So there's ways to game it where you use weak cards for movement, so you get a bunch of those random encounters with other characters, or you can use a couple of strong cards if you're interested in just getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So there's definitely some strategy, I guess, that comes into play. It's just when you get into, it's weird because I don't want to say this isn't my type of game, but this isn't my type of game on the NES, I guess. When you get into, the Myst is probably maybe the best example. Another good example, I don't know if you had this game. I'm making an assumption here because I feel like everyone on their very first computer, those of us who got our first computers in like 1997, which is around when I got my first PC, I feel like everyone who had a Windows PC in 1997 had this game because it like just came with it. The Journeyman Project?
I can honestly say I've never heard of that.
Okay, it was a similar, like, you clicked a button and your character would take a step forward or a step, like just like Myst, right? Where you like,
yeah, I gotcha.
Click on, but like it was just more sci-fi. Like you were a time traveler,
it's like a whole genre of games. So I mean, like there's sci-fi ones, there's like fantasy ones, there's
on Nintendo just doesn't work for me because you have to with your controller click on the word move, and then when you get into like the places like, because I was watching a playthrough, when you get into places like West City and Snow's Village and stuff, you have to pick whether you want to move east or north or south or west or central or what, like, and you have no map. It's very easy to get turned around.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, that's definitely a shortcoming of doing a game like this on the Nintendo, that's for sure.
And there's also, I don't know how much of a walkthrough you watched, but did you see the one part where you have to go into West City and like, I don't know how you would know this. Maybe if you walk through and talk to some of the characters or something. But there's one part where he goes and it's like, this is a dead end. And he like clicks on move again, but he says move forward, and it's like Goku bashes his head into the wall. A crack appears. And it's like you do it like 5 more times and you bust through the wall and find a sewer. That's crazy. That's like, you know what it reminded me of? And again, this is just someone playing through the game on a borderline speed run, I will say. I don't think it was quite a speed run. So maybe it's them just already knowing what to do. That reminds me of the part, it's pretty infamous, I think, at this point, in Castlevania 2, where you have to walk up to the wall that's like the dead end and kneel down next to it for like 25 seconds. And when you do, it's the only way to get past this part of the game.
Yeah, so there's a reason why that was put in, especially a lot of Nintendo games, is because they wanted you to call their toll-free tip line.
Yeah.
So some games would actually artificially block you with the most unintuitive crap just to get you to call that tip line to get the correct answer.
Or buy Nintendo Power Magazine.
There you go. There's option 2. Yeah.
That was the other thing you could do. You could have a subscription to Nintendo. Like I remember the only way to get a map for the original Legend of Zelda was from the Nintendo Power Magazine.
Back in my day, we didn't have DLC. We had to go out and buy the magazine.
Or I remember, like, I had friends who did this where they would map it out like on paper.
Oh yeah, I've seen a lot of those. Yeah.
In a game games like this are just tough sells on the NES, I think.
They are, and I'm that special breed of nerd that enjoys that sort of masochism, though.
So let's just recap real quick and go back, as we did when we watched the Curse of the Blood Rubies movie, and rate these games out of 7.
Out of 7.
That's what we did.
Yeah, that's absolutely what we did.
So how many Dragon Balls out of 7 do you give Dragon Ball Dragon Daihikyō, the overhead bullet nightmare game?
I'm going to give that one... I'll give that one a 4.
Ooh, wow.
Because for the time, I think it was probably a little bit above average. And I feel comfortable with that.
I'm going with a 3.5. I mean, this is a game and a system that ruined a company. That's not true. Like I said, they had success in, like we said, they had success in 91 with that Barcode game, but I go with a 3.5 on that one.
Okay.
And I'm also going to go with a 3.5 on Shenlong no Nazo. It's a more fluid game. It's a little more like fun to play, but it is that extra level of frustrating of having borderline broken energy mechanics that make it like, without that, I would be prepared to give this maybe a 5 out of 7 and actually attempt to play through the whole thing.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would have given it a 5, and like you, I probably would have played it a lot more had there not been that energy mechanic. But because of that energy mechanic, I think I'm just going to give it a 3.
And then finally, Dragon Ball Daimaō Fukkatsu. God, it's really tough. It's like, I'm going to preface my review by saying borderline unrateable because I couldn't play a comprehensible version of the game to me as a filthy gaijin. But no, I give this like a 3.5. I think maybe if objectively maybe a 4. Like it's I feel like early RPGs like this, I mean, you are blazing a trail for things to come later. It's just not that fun to me.
That's fair. I mean, this is a pretty subjective rating system anyways. I think me personally, this one I would give a 5, but I'm going to go with a 4 for now because I haven't actually been able to get my hands on it to try it, so I don't know how painful it is to actually play the game. Yeah, I'll go with a 4 for now. I might come back later with an update if I do manage to get my hands on a working copy.
And I want to also say, for the record, this is very much we are both, seems like, grading these very much on a curve. There's certainly a sliding scale, because if I grade that first one just on how much I personally enjoyed it, it's like a 1. Like,
yeah. Also, like by any modern metrics, these things are 1s, maybe 2s.
Yeah, I honestly think if I had rented Dragon Power, I never did, but I think if I had, in no small part because when you went to the store and you rented a game, your mom was like, "You're stuck with that for a week. She wasn't taking it back early for you. She wasn't going and renting you another game if you didn't like it. That was it. That was what you got. I might have, bashed my head through that game if it had been 1992.
Yeah, I could see that. Exact same for myself.
That's Dragon Ball video games. There's the first 3 of them. We'll be doing more of these, as we kind of get into more video games.
Woo! Well, that's pretty much all of them, except again for a few who I can't seem to pin down. Also, this is horrifyingly easy and impersonal, and I want to stop.
Fair enough. You and I against about 20 low-level warriors? I think we'll make fairly short work of the whole lot of them, and then we can proceed with our mission.
But our ship's still in total disrepair. The shipyards are destroyed, buildings are in ruin. We're going to be stranded here.
Still just a recruit. This is an entire Frieza planet. And you think all of our assets are in a single location? What do you think this is, Tatooine? We'll make for the nearest weapons depot and the next one and so on until we find a suitable replacement ship.
And that'll just be it. This planet's in ruin. All those blues and greens of grass and moss and the light craterous landscape, or whatever you called it, is just a scorched nightmare. Do you think we'll just hop on a ship and be on our merry way?
Oh, heavens no. There'll be a full written report to do, a distress beacon to drop, fresh samples to pull from these carbivores to see if our scientists can engineer their mind control techniques, samples to pull from the dreadnoughts while they're still fresh to preserve for our scientists as well. We'll also have some dull days ahead of us, and speaking of which, we better go get this part over with destroying, putting down those fighters out there. Will any of those fighters out there pose a challenge for us? Spoiler alert, nah. Anyway, find out next time and help us achieve our final forum.
Final Form is written and produced by Tom Gwelly. It is performed by Dan Kinney and Tom Gwelly. Our webmaster is Dan Kinney. Our theme music is provided by YouTube content creator GVG Kit. Want to learn more about the Dragon Ball universe, including concept art, behind-the-scenes interviews, and recommendations from Jelli and Bekinney? Connect with us on social media. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Final Forum Pod. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you receive your podcasts. And of course, make sure to share it with your friends and family and help us spread the word of the glory of Lord Frieza. The Frieza Force thanks you for your listenership.